that they have. Ooh, and I'm also supposed to remind you all that we're recording this session. So there you go. We are recording this session. If you have questions during the presentation, then put them in the chat. We would love it also if folks stay muted until the breakout sessions, just so that we can avoid any background noise or echo. And also if you like, and we would prefer apparently, that you keep your video off during the panel discussion. And then looking at the time here, we're at 5:04. Should we go ahead and officially get started? What do you think, Diana?
Yes. Do we have Paul in the building?
Paul White there. Scrolling through the participants. I don't see him yet. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get started, and he can join in progress. But yeah, if everyone who's not talking could mute themselves so we can limit the echo. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, wait, back. Maybe back one more. Get that. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, my name is Shiloh Ballard. I run the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. Welcome to another one of our monthly Biketivist forums. Here we have some Zoom basics, which I just went over. Love for you to name yourself so that we know who you are in the little Zoom box. I want you to also, if you feel comfortable, putting your pronouns there, and then also the city that you hail from. As we're going through today's presentation, we'd love it if you would ask your questions in the chat. Again, please stay muted until the breakout sessions and keep your video off during the panel discussion. Next slide. And then just some general guidelines here that we want folks to just be aware of how much space you're taking up. You all have heard this, make space, take space. Just be cognizant of that. And try to make sure that folks who aren't speaking up, especially in your breakout rooms, have an opportunity to speak and feel comfortable. Be respectful of one another and our differences, don't interrupt, stay on topic. And of course, always assume good intent. Next slide. So here's the rough agenda for today. Love it if folks could put in the chat who they are and what micromobility device you are most curious about. So let's get started. Is it for me, it's those one wheel thingies, like hoverboard thingies. I have no idea how people ride those things. So we're going to start with the introductions, 5 to 5:05. Then I'm going to hand things off to Emma Shlaes, who has recently left SVBC to work for commute.org. We're sad about that, but super happy that she's going to give us an overview of the history of bike share. And then we're going to do a micromobility panel Q&A with some really, really awesome folks who are on the Zoom with us today. For those of you who are here, you probably are curious just like we all are. You know, you've noticed as we're riding in the bike lanes that there are more things that are not bikes that are in the bike lanes. And sometimes there's scooters on the sidewalk, sometimes there's electric bikes in the bike lanes and they're going really fast. And we're all trying to make sense of this and figure out how we advance our common agenda together. So with that, I think next slide. And actually, while we have everyone, I just want to put in a really quick plug that the city of San Jose is having its next Open Streets event, which is called Viva Calle. And we at SVBC, part of our role in making Viva Calle a success is we help recruit volunteers to staff intersections. So I just wanted to put a plug in here. We need folks to volunteer for the next Viva Calle. And I think Chelsea's going to put in the chat the link to sign up to be a volunteer. It's November 7th. It's super fun. And for those of you who live outside of San Jose, this has become a destination open streets event. And open streets are the gateway drug to getting folks to appreciate living life outside of a car. And so for those of you who don't live in San Jose and want your cities to be doing these kinds of events, this is a good opportunity for you to come and experience it, see it, and advocate for it in your city. So sign up to volunteer. All right, that's all I have on that. And I am going to go ahead and kick things over to Emma.
All right, thanks, Shiloh. And thank you, everyone. I'm excited to be here. And you can, Clarissa, go to the next slide. I'm going to go really fast because I don't have a lot of time, but just a high-level summary of like bike share in the Bay Area. I'm going to do a map form and a timeline form. So here you can see 3 different years, 2017 through 2019. Originally in 2017, there wasn't that much. You can see it was on the peninsula, a little bit in the East Bay. And then in 2018, it expanded rapidly with a bunch of new systems coming in. And then some of those kind of either went away or, coalesced together in 2019. And I don't have a current map, but it would look probably even different from that now. So go to the next slide. This is the timeline version. And we'll share these slides, I think, after, but the 2013, that's when Bay Area Bike Share first debuted, and that was a pilot that was funded by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and it was in the cities that are listed here, so only 5 cities. So it was publicly funded, and it had mixed success. And then in 2015, that's when a company called Motivate came in and decided to rebrand. They were paying for everything, so it was no longer publicly funded. And then they decided to take some of those bikes away from Redwood City, Palo Alto, and Mountain View and expand into the East Bay. More recently, after that, there was some other dockless bike shares that were being funded publicly and by cities, or also some companies, private companies that wanted them on site. And then in 2017 was when the big explosion of all the dockless bikes, like you may remember OFO or Blue Go-Go, also Lime, which is still around, Spin. There was a bunch of them all over. There were yellow, blue, green, and they were in every city. And those were completely funded by the companies that were putting them in there. And they were no longer funded by the cities. And that's also when e-scooters started coming in. And then since then, there's been just a lot of transition, including the original Bay Area Bike Share is now owned by, it's no longer Bay Area Bike Share, but Lyft owns that. Uber bought Jump and then turned it over to Lime. So there's just been a lot of consolidation and changes, but also a lot of those big dockless bike share companies went away. And so I'm excited to hear more from the presenters tonight. If you go to the next slide. This is just showing, this is only up to 2018, but showing like how much more trips were on micromobility. And that's when particularly scooters came onto the scene, but also dockless bike share. So there was like the more traditional station-based bike share. And then when dockless bike shares and scooters came on, that's when it really went up. I'm not sure what it looks like now, but next slide. So I'm going to skip over this, but I'm going to share a link to a letter that SVBC wrote with Transform, Bike East Bay, and SF Bike Coalition a couple years ago, that we had some recommendations for where the region should be going in terms of bike and scooter share. And we wanted to expand funds for equity purposes for bike and scooter share, continue expansion in communities of concern, continue the low-income discounts. If you go to the next slide. Also had some recommendations for cities' permit programs. So not every city had to reinvent the wheel. And the next slide. Some recommendations for how cities could create safe spaces for micromobility. So I'll share the link to that so you can review that in more detail. And I will turn it back over now to Jennifer, who will be the moderator for our panel.
Awesome. Thanks for going over all that. That was really informative. So we have a great lineup of panelists tonight, and we're already seeing some really good questions in the chat. So please feel free to keep throwing those questions in there. And, you know, I think a lot of these things we'll hopefully touch on as we get through the discussion, but let's start by introducing the panelists. And I guess I'll go first. I think there's a slide with everyone's name on it. Yep. So I'm Jennifer Fierman. I am your moderator. I'm a transportation planner. I've been planning for 15 years. Originally from Florida, moved to the Bay Area in 2018. And I currently work at a tech company that does big data for transit. And how about Bivett next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Bivett Brackett. I currently am the Senior Manager for Government Relations with Lime, and I come from the community space, and I'm excited and honored to be here with everyone today.
And Neal?
Good evening, folks. My name is Neal Patel, Community Affairs with BayWheels. And I've been with BayWheels for about 2 years. Thanks to Silicon Valley Bike Coalition for putting this event on. Y'all have been super resilient in kind of adapting to COVID, and I really appreciate these online forums and the opportunity to connect with folks. I've been working in the Bay Area for about 15 years now, San Francisco Bike Coalition, City of San Francisco, and now for Bike Share. So I've been working on the issues from all different sides, and happy to be here. Thanks.
And Bob.
Hey everybody, my name is Bob Walsh, and I am with Bird. I work with local governments and do some community outreach. Been involved in shared microtransportation. I believe October, if I'm counting right, is my 5th year in working with this. First with a company called Scoot in San Francisco, and then Bird bought Scoot, and I am with Bird. And I have been in San Francisco for more than 60 years. Wow. Thanks.
Whenever you say that, I always wonder if you said 6-0, right?
6-0.
Oh, that's amazing. And did Paul make it? Oh, yeah, there you are. Paul, please introduce yourself. Can anyone hear Paul? Is it just me?
Sorry about that. Yeah, Paul White with Superpedestrian. We run the Link scooter fleet. And thanks for putting this on today.
Awesome. So not super structured here. So I have a short list of questions, and folks can feel free to jump in. I mean, folks, by folks, I mean our panelists. So the first question, this is an easy one to get us warmed up. For your company, what does micromobility mean? And I think I'm actually gonna call on Bob first, because you mentioned something about serving people with disabilities. So just kind of curious, what does micromobility mean for Bird?
I am muted. I caught myself.
Good job.
So what does micromobility mean for Bird? You know, really well, first of all, the thing I was thinking about micromobility is actually, I was going to say that it's kind of like those little cars in the circus where you have a tiny little car and about 16 people can fit in there. And I was actually going to say that next year, Bird will be introducing our little jitney service where we will be hauling around, 20 or 30 people in a teeny tiny car and spitting them out. But actually, that's not what we're going to do. That is not what we think of as micromobility. But really what micromobility is, I think the way that we define it is a small vehicle, for an individual, maybe for two, that is that's electric, right? That's clean powered, and that is available for folks to use on a rental basis, and typically on a one-way rental basis, right? So they can find one on the street, grab it, take it to where they want to go, and then leave it where they go, and then somebody else can use it after that.
Great. How about Neal? What does micromobility mean to Lyft and BayWheels?
Yeah. I'm going to focus a little bit on the word just mobility, because Lyft, we are a lot more than the micro. Our mission is to improve people's lives with the world's best transportation, and we do that in lots of ways. I work for the BayWheels team, and we have a whole transit bikes and scooters division within the company. And we're doing lots of things. We're trying to get our apps to be integrated so that you can get a ride share, you can also get a bike, or you can get a bus pass. I focus on the bike share components, and for us, that means providing excellent and ubiquitous and affordable bike share service to 5 communities in the Bay Area for now: San Jose, Emeryville, Oakland, Berkeley, and San Francisco. We are one Bay Area, and so it's rewarding that we have this service that spans kind of the whole Bay Area, and really we put a big focus on connections with transit and connections into neighborhoods and destinations. The world, I think, kind of at the top of this presentation, I think that the picture that was painted was just a lot of change and evolution of how all of this stuff works. And, I don't think we've seen anything yet. I think there's a lot of stuff on the horizon with technology, with devices, with expansion, hopefully with some more public subsidies to help support this. And I'm excited to be here with you all as we move forward.
Thanks. All right, Bivett, for Lime, what does micromobility mean? And you're muted.
We have a saying at Lime that it's any place, anytime, anywhere, but pretty much we think of micromobility as a simple, accessible, and essential mode of transportation that's basically green, mean, and lean, and that it's accessible to everyone. So we really are focusing a lot of what we can do on making sure that Lime has an equitable lens. And so we have a fleet of adaptable vehicles that we also provide to our disability community as well, to also introduce them to different forms of EV vehicles as well. So I think for Lime, it's really about expanding the original idea of who micromobility really was for, and who can access it, and who would be able to use it. And so what we saw during the pandemic is that, as more people were needing to get out and get to different places, that this became one of the #1 modes of transportation around the globe. And so we want to continue to be a global leader in this space and make sure that everyone has access to it.
That's great. Paul, I swear I'm not going to call on you last anymore today. So for you,
I deserve
Link.
it. I deserve trying to get on. I had tech issues because I'm an old man. But
we got you. What does micromobility mean for your company?
I'll just say 3 things. Replacing car trips. So, micromobility isn't really working if it's not replacing passenger personal car trips and ride-hail trips, which we know are more polluting than they need to be in cities. I think integrating with transit is a big one, right? Are we really going to be a first and last mile solution? That means operating a service, viably and hopefully profitably in the hinterlands, outskirts of a city where we only might get, less than 1 trip per day per vehicle. And I think the third thing is, like, how are we playing with others? How is our service impacting the walking experience, people with disabilities? I think micromobility to some people is a bad word. I think in part that's because the sector hasn't often, or not, sometimes not lived up to its promises with regard to that third one.
Awesome. Thanks for that. So moving into our next question, and I'm going to try to tie this into some things I see in the chat. So we want to talk about what are some of the unique challenges your companies have faced during the pandemic, and ways that you found to be resilient. And in particular, if you have instances that apply specifically to the Bay Area that may differ than what you're doing in other parts of the country, we'd love to hear about that. And whoever wants to go first.
I'll jump in. Ladies first, So I will say recently it's had a extravagant or monumental impact on our business, in the sense that I'm in San Francisco, and in our San Francisco operations headquarters, we did have a couple COVID scares, not necessarily any one of our employees getting COVID at the job site or passing it to other people, but because we're regulated, and San Francisco is really strict about COVID procedures. That meant, shutting down, sending all of our employees home for 14 days, 10 days to quarantine, and then how that reflects in terms of the service that we're able to provide to the community. It means reduced services in areas where people are now getting used to using micromobility a little bit more, as well as, in terms of meeting all of our compliance issues and stuff like that. So I think as we continue to deal with different diseases across the world and continue to deal with COVID, I think that that's also going to be a challenge in terms of staffing and stuff like that, because all of our employees are full-time employees.
And tacking on just with another question here, what do you see as post-COVID? Is there going to be a substantial change in the way that you think about the service you provide?
Yeah.
And I mean, post-COVID is a very loose term, right? We're 2 years in and it's never ending.
I think it's more or less like we're just staying vigilant, and making sure that we're using, the best products, the best cleaning products, making sure that we're staying strict to our requirements for our employees. So we still require masks inside for our employees. We still require, there's a lot of requirements that we're putting on the table front. And, as our city mayor has required for people to be vaccinated, we haven't yet made that requirement of our employees, but we're aware that, any measure that we can to protect our frontline workers and is important to us, and also making sure that we're protecting the community in a safe way as well.
Bob, did you want to jump in?
Well, I was just going to jump in and say that the interesting thing about the pandemic, and the old saying about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. There is some truth there, but what's really interesting about the pandemic is I think that pre-pandemic cities especially were trying hard to figure out where does micromobility really fit into the transportation system, because there were impressions that this is more of an amenity. This is something for the tech bros and that kind of stuff. We heard a lot of that. After the pandemic hit, most cities deemed us an essential service. They actually saw us as something that was really needed. And if you think about it, I mean, bus services were shut down for a while. It was very difficult for people to get around. And so I think the business grew up over the last year. And I think we've become part of, and I think what we always should have been, the pandemic really illustrated that if we're talking about mode shift, if we're talking about getting people out of cars, then we really need a broad spectrum of ways to get around. And that includes, riding your bike. It includes perhaps renting a scooter or renting a bicycle or taking an Uber when it's needed. It also really includes being able to walk out your door and walk down to the corner. And I think sometimes, Paul mentioned this, so I'm just going to reiterate. Walking is a really important part of multimodal and micromodality and everything else. And shared vehicles can really be a big part of that. But anyway, I do think overall that what the pandemic did is it matured the market. It helped us define what our role is. And I think that we're just going deeper and deeper there from that. It's just like being an essential transportation service and one of many great choices that people have, besides jumping in their car and using their car for that, short and medium trip.
Neal, anything to add?
Yeah, I want to tack on. I think the bikes and scooters as essential. I definitely absolutely agree with that. We made the decision to not shut down at all during the pandemic and just to stay operating from the get-go. It's a challenge financially just because there are not a whole lot of people moving, but we had a program for healthcare workers to have free memberships during those first several months. And, we did some analysis afterwards across all the cities we operate in and found, an increase in trips to and from stations that were near some major medical centers, which gave us some indication that people were actually, doctors and nurses and pharmacists were using our services. Post COVID or, just whatever return or just wherever we're going, it's going to be interesting. A lot of my work focuses on our expansion efforts. So we are not even yet done with expanding the number of stations we have in the region. we're only expanding in San Francisco right now. Every other city is kind of built out more or less with adjustments and tweaks as needed. But in San Francisco, and a lot of the cities, we've built our network around downtowns, around transit, and we believe that downtown is not dead, that people are still going to go there to work and to play and to eat. And so we're not making any major changes to how we plan our bike share network, but we are vigilant. We're watchful. We're going to take a look at the data and see how things go, because we might need to adjust where stations are to meet people's needs. Fortunately, while it is somewhat expensive to move a station, they're not bolted into the ground. They're relatively easy to move, and so we can be pretty nimble in that way. I think in a way that a freeway or even a subway line can't be. So I think that, and when you look at dockless, that's extremely nimble. So I think that bikes and scooters, we're definitely part of the solution and recovery here, and I hope that we can adapt faster than other modes as we all move forward.
Great. Does anyone else have anything to add about kind of the pandemic effects on the way we've been operating? If not, we'll kind of jump into some more topics. The question is about how your company deals with, this has a lot of things in it, so pick your poison. The destruction of property, misplacement, theft, etc. And so I think the focus of this is kind of around where these devices operate, where they are parked, like all of those things. And I've seen a few questions in the chat kind of surrounding those topics. So I don't know who wants to go first. Neal, BayWheels, bikes. Why don't you start?
Defer to Paul. Paul's really excited to say something right now. Go for it.
Oh.
No, Neal, go ahead. I just missed the last round, so I wanted to make sure I reminded people I'm still here. But
I'll be brief. Theft and vandalism is a huge problem for us. I'm sure for everyone here. Vandalism of our stations. We actually have a just constant theft of the battery that's housed in our kiosk. And don't give anyone ideas here, but people pry open that kiosk, they steal the battery, which is more or less like a car battery, and you'll see this, station by station by station. And sometimes we can't keep up with the replacement and the repairs, and it damages the user experience. And people, if several stations in the neighborhood have been attacked, that day or two, people can't use the system. We want to partner with police departments, with cities to think about how we can prevent and or enforce this. We're improving our technology for security, and then when you add in the e-bikes, they're everywhere, and so people kind of stealing them with the batteries. We're trying to attack that with at all different angles, but it's a big problem that's really important to us. And I don't have any solutions. I'm actually not part of that core team, and I haven't thought creatively about it, but it's really important. I think it's something that we need to solve, or at least get better at. Otherwise, I think a lot of our systems are not going to be sustainable in the long term.
That's interesting. And I mean, if anyone has perspective on some of the dockless options and kind of what happens, what the challenges you all face with those, I think we'd be really interested to hear about that too.
I mean, I think a lot of the challenges related to this, we've seen a lot of tech solutions throwing at these problems, but we found that the decision, we made pretty early on to not do any gig labor and hire W-2 living wage employees across the board has made a big difference in terms of fleet management, chasing down errant scooters, getting the granular level of block by block knowledge to inform our fleet management. And ultimately, I think that's proven, just good for our bottom line in terms of reducing our loss rate and improving some other things about our business. So, and I think we're seeing I think that's a trend in the industry now of moving away from gig, which we might all agree is a good thing.
And I mean, kind of shifting a little bit away from just the talk of theft, what about, people who say that these bikes and scooters are parked all over the place, they're blocking the sidewalks? What about the management of these devices? once, you know, they are being used, but they're everywhere. There's all over the floor at Dearden Station. Like what are some tactics we're using to address that?
Oh, sorry, Bivett, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
I think in terms of or what they would call a micromobility or scooter clutter or bikes clutter, I think those are solutions that it can be better served with kind of getting community input. What I've seen, and I'm, you know, fairly new to the Bay Area in terms of this is my almost first month anniversary with Lime, but I'm not dead to the space, the transit space, but in the sense that there's not a lot of infrastructure throughout the cities in terms of bike infrastructure. There's not a lot of pedestrian infrastructure. There's not a lot of infrastructure to support what's out there right now. And we know that the demand is bigger than the infrastructure. So for instance, about a couple weeks ago, we were looking at just the plan for Oakland and where exactly are electric vehicle charging stations versus where are the bike racks where the lock to function has to happen, where people have to lock their scooter to that bike rack. And we noticed that most of the bike racks were not equitably distributed across the city as well. So that also impacts ridership in terms of where you can park. And so I think that some of these things that we're still saying are micro issues or maybe issues in some neighborhoods and other neighborhoods have solved for them is because they've actually invested in the infrastructure to make sure that they're the right number of devices deployed. You know, it's deployed in areas where people are going to use them. And then also really thinking about which communities actually don't have access and what does that look like for them.
And I mean, kind of tagging on to the idea about demand and usage, we had an interesting question about, is there any data or what does user data say in terms of why some people gravitate towards a scooter versus towards a bike? Have any of your companies kind of looked into that to see what's behind it?
And I mean, there's that question, that question in the chat, you know, I think there's a lot of answers. I like, you know, Charles Brown from Rutgers has talked about, you know, scooters being so new, not having the cultural baggage that bikes sometimes have. And maybe since so many people are new to scooters, there's less apprehension about looking like, you know, being a newbie. And then just like the ease of it, you know, the NAPSA report's fascinating too, just looking at how bikes and scooters have differed a little bit in terms of like trip replacement, which may be more reflective of the cities where bikes and scooters tend to be popular. But it's an open question. You know, Chris Cherry's been doing a little bit of research on how crash typologies between bikes and scooters might differ a little bit and really be the same in most cases. But still, I think an open question.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I did want to get back to the previous question a little bit. There's a couple points I wanted to bring up. And one of them is in just getting around things like vandalism and stuff like that. I do think that one thing I'd like to touch on is that if the systems are not, if people don't feel like these systems are for them, then it can generate either apathy or even some anger. And it is incumbent upon the operators, people like Bird and Lime and the rest of us, to make sure that we are reaching out into all communities and we're making sure that these vehicles, that we're providing availability of these vehicles for everybody so that they feel like, yeah, hey, that thing parked on the corner is for me. It's for me to use. And if we don't feel that way, then we don't care if it gets knocked over. And maybe even we're a little bit angry because they're in our neighborhood and we're going to do something, you know, that maybe we shouldn't do. The other thing I wanted to point out just about clutter is what sometimes isn't understood is actually the scale with which micromobility is used. So I was going to say in San Jose, where we operate, last week we had about 4,000 rides. Okay, 4,000 different individual rides. Now there's 3 other scooter operators and there's the bike operator. So I think we're probably talking 10,000 or so rides a week. Even if we looked at, say, 1 or 2% of those rides ended in a place where maybe the scooter was knocked over or something, you'd still see a number of them. But what I think is important about micromobility is to look at it in total, and certainly it should always be valued on its benefits versus its costs. But 10,000 rides, and if we look at 10,000 rides and maybe somewhere around 40% of those replaced car or say Uber type trips, you know, there's a real value there. There's a whole lot of activity going on. And actually, the vast majority of riders are riding in a responsible manner. You know, there's a few that aren't, and we contribute to try to fix that. So I did just definitely want to point that out. And now I forgot what the original question was. What was, because I had something good there.
I could probably help you out, Bob, real quick, because I saw some of the questions in the chat. So maybe it's probably best if I just refer right back to those. So there was a question around, is it safe and where do scooters actually belong? So California has a state law where you cannot ride scooters on the sidewalk. So that is not, more and more cities are moving to the lock to function, which means that scooters cannot just be parked anywhere. They must be parked and locked to a bicycle rack. Previously, it was 1 scooter per bicycle rack. More cities are now moving to allow 2 scooters to a bicycle rack or 2 bikes to a bicycle rack. There are other systems that are out there. Lyft enjoys, they have a multi-bike rack that they can use as well. As far as charging stations, what Lime has done is we now have swappable batteries. So we no longer have to, go take our scooters or bikes off the road and put them onto a charging station, et cetera. We have fully swappable batteries. So those are some changes that have happened within the micromobility space, upgrades that all of the operators have been doing to increase and make sure that we have different ways to try and lessen, I guess some people call it scooter clutter and stuff like that in different areas. So those are the efforts that we all are taking.
Bob, did that jog your memory at all?
No.
Okay, it'll come to you like tomorrow.
Sorry,
in the
Bob.
shower or something.
I tried.
That's right. I liked your answer a lot anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of really great questions around this topic. One that I did want to see if we have time to answer is if any of you have worked with any cities to designate some of those types of loading zones, as Bivett mentioned, like if there's a lack of infrastructure to allow for proper placement of these, have any of your companies worked with cities or entities to remedy that?
Yeah, I'll add, and it kind of piggybacks to the last question. Clutter on the sidewalks, cars clutter our streets, bikes and scooters, they do. And it's definitely a problem, and we want to be part of the solution. I think that the data that we get around where people are going and user feedback or business feedback has actually been a really great tool for us to change it. We encourage people to request bike racks. We worked the city of San Francisco's bike share program manager is also the bike parking program manager. So it's all in one house, and we add more bike racks where they're needed. We add them in neighborhoods where they don't even have any. And, yes, it can be a problem initially, but, other than people going around and counting the number of bikes that are tied to racks, we actually have a nimble solution to solve it on the fly.
I think.
Bivett, did you? Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead, Paul.
I think, it comes back to, I think, a supported, dedicated labor force. And then, GPS, right? We know that GPS doesn't work in cities with tall buildings, and a lot of scooter clutter is due to abandoned scooters because they ride into a geofenced area, and then all of a sudden the geofence kicks in 30 feet later and they're left with a scooter that doesn't work. Or, the fleet management team doesn't know where the scooter is because, again, GPS is screwy. So, I think it's true that all of our companies are working on solutions to this problem. Ours is called Pedestrian Defense, which uses, new technology to get a better read on where that scooter is and how it's moving. But I think this is probably the biggest existential, challenge facing the industry. We don't even have a chance to make a profit if we don't get a permit. And cities are looking at, too many complaints still on, scooter clutter. And it's true that cars do a lot more damage, but scooters are new and they're really close to pedestrians. And people, I think, are inured to a lot of the externalities of the automobile after 100 years.
Yeah.
I guess I was just going to say that the appetite for scooters has also grown during the pandemic for a lot of the reasons that Bob, Neal, and Paul already said. But also one of the other ways that scooter use has grown is in our essential workers in the food business in terms of delivery service, A lot of people didn't have ways to make income during the pandemic and went towards being food deliverers for like people like DoorDash, et cetera, and those companies. And I know we actually gave free rides to essential workers in that food space because we recognized that those were a lot of times workers who were laid off, and that was their only mode of being able to get income during the pandemic. And so there is kind of this balance that's going on in terms of increase in demand as well as usage. And so if you look at any study or even just Google micromobility since the pandemic, you'll see that there's been an exponential increase in rides and from across all of the carriers.
This has been really great. I want to jump into the next topic because I know we're running short on time, and I want to make sure we get to talk about this. So I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about some of the equity and inclusion considerations your companies have implemented, specifically around access for low-income communities and access for people who may not have the proper payment method or smartphones, things like that. So let's get into that a little bit.
So our policy at Superpedestrian and our linked scooter fleet is to do 70% discount for anyone who's on any form of public assistance. And I think having that program is one thing, but getting people enrolled is another. Some great points earlier about like, people, is this service for me? And so, we've been doing a lot of concerted outreach, meeting people where they are, signing them up. Our sign up rates in like Seattle, for example, Hartford, Connecticut, I think are among the best in the industry, but we have to do better. And if we're not operating our service for everyone and operating it like the best public transit system available, we're not doing our job. So a lot more to do.
Yeah, and I'll jump in with that. Absolutely, it does have to be for everyone. It's interesting. I think in the beginning when we started, the cities really came to us and wanted us to do a lot of outreach into areas, transit deserts, and perhaps economically disadvantaged areas. And the first thing that we came up with, right, is a discount program. Say, well, we've got, it's free or it's half off or whatever. And of course, we got very few people to sign up. And I think it does get back to the same issue I mentioned before, which is this for me? If we throw a whole bunch of scooters out in the Bayview in San Francisco or in other areas like that, do people think, oh, that's for me to use, or is that for somebody else? So some of the things that we've done, one is we do have discount programs. We also have programs for folks that don't have smartphones where they can activate the scooter. It's actually through a texting deal. And if you don't have a bank, you can actually pay for scoot credits through outlets that we've got. That I think you go to certain drugstores and you can, load up and get your credits that way. But the other thing is we need to work in the community. One of them is working with community groups, right? And that is going into these community groups and talking about our program, because the community groups are the ones that are, in a sense, can be an ambassador for us to say, yeah, no, wait, this, let's take the mystery out of this program. You can use this program. This is something that can work for you. And to that end, what we've done in our discount programs is also anyone who works for a 501c3 organization. So anybody at Silicon Valley Bike, for example, can also get our discounted program. And the idea there is to encourage folks who are working with people who may need assistance, to encourage them to use the service and to try the service, and then to in a sense say, hey, this is working for me, and to try to really demystify it. And I think that, I think it's a longer way to go, and we have a long way to go. We're still trying to get a more diverse ridership on our scooters, but I think it's a really great way to get it happening, and rather than just kind of throwing scooters in a certain area or creating some kind of a discount program.
Neal, I know you had a comment.
Yeah, it's very similarly, we've got the programs, we have placed the infrastructure in communities. Per our agreement with the region, we have a threshold of the number of stations that we have to place in what are called communities of concern, which include low-income communities. And we're well above that threshold We have done bike rides with the faith community. We've worked with nonprofits, and that work is going to continue. That is just central to our mission to get people to use the Bike Share for All program, and just even if they're not low income, to use our services. We've also, I know that there's a lot of folks here that are doing interesting things around people with disabilities, and we definitely put that in our equity bucket. We have a program we're doing. I think the question of how a bike share system is more accessible to people with disabilities is still a question that we are all asking ourselves. Right now, we've got a pilot program that we've been running for about 2 years in Oakland and San Francisco. It's currently just in its last couple of months in San Francisco, of working with BORP, Bay Area Outdoor Recreation Program. They got a long track record working with people with disabilities and getting them connected with a variety of sports, including cycling. I'll put the URL in the chat, but if you or anyone wants to try out one of their adaptive bikes, we've got a program in San Francisco. We're evaluating and learning what people want, what they need. Is this a recreation system and or transportation? How, sometimes the devices are very specific to the person with their very specific disability. And so we're definitely asking ourselves the question of how we can learn from that and, apply it to a system that is region-wide.
Thanks. And I know we're almost at time, so I've seen that we're just about at 5:50. So I'm going to make this last question like lightning round, 3 words. What is the future of micromobility?
I'm going to start. I think I said it, use these words at the top, but they remain true. Affordable, ubiquitous, and equitable.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just
Bob,
say more vehicles for more people.
That's 4 words, but we'll allow it.
Okay.
Bivett?
Multimodal, accessible, and fun.
I like that. And Paul?
I mean, what everybody else said, I'll just add, compliant. I think we still have a lot to prove that we can meet sort of the basic standards that cities are setting for us. So, sorry, that's a lot of words. Compliant.
Compliant and what else?
That's enough. That's good.
Compliant. Okay, we'll just combine all of your words into a phrase. So I know we're at time for the Q&A. So back to SVBC. I don't know if there's any other questions that you want us to touch upon, or if you want to just go ahead and transition to the next part of our meeting.
I think this was really fantastic. This is Shiloh. I would just throw one question out there, since this is our Biketivist forum. This is the gathering of all of the folks who are involved in our local teams. And at the top of the hour, we will be splitting up into our Zoom rooms by city so that folks can scheme about how to get more bike-friendly infrastructure put in their community. And I know several of you, actually all of you, have been really helpful in partnering with SVBC and other bike coalitions to bring more people into the advocacy space, to push people to get involved in SVBC or SFBC or Bike East Bay and other bike coalitions. So thank you for that. And if any of you want to just comment really quickly about how you're doing that or how you're viewing that, and if you've seen some really great successes out of that. I know that a couple of times some of you have tweeted to your users via, like, you've pushed out a tweet via your app. You can tell how much I know about this stuff. I can't even use the language around technology. And as a result, we had a bunch of people contact us to get involved in our San Jose local team. So if anyone has anything they want to add on how you all are involved in getting folks, your clients involved in advocacy, would love to hear it.
I guess I can go. As I mentioned earlier, my background is more in community relations. I'm a San Francisco native, kind of a unicorn. And one of the great 2 tools that we use here at Lyme is our Lyme Action and our Lyme Hero programs. And so those programs are a way that we work with our community partners to amplify their voices using our platforms. And so we do that multiple ways. So we do that, we participate with some of our partners when they do their annual events, and we are able to shout them out not only to our external customers or our riders through the Riders app. We also can shoot them emails, as well as we sometimes do events internally with our employees as well. So California Climate Action recently did kind of a big event, and we were one of the smallest but largest organizations to have a really large amount of people to take the climate action and actually sign up. And so those are some ways that we use our technology to make sure that we're evangelizing more people and including more people in some of the great work that our partners do. And so it's really important for us to hear from all of our community members, whether they, love scooters, hate scooters, love bikes, hate bikes, but it's really about starting those conversations and bringing people into the room and start having those discussions so that people can understand that, an electric bike, a regular bike can be for you, and just providing opportunities to be at community events, et cetera, so people can get their first try.
Safer streets, better policies is a win for all of us, even people that don't use our services. And we support a lot of infrastructure projects and changes that are happening in the cities we operate. And we push out messages or alerts to riders, and we're able to even tailor them for people that perhaps, when the Better Market Street project was happening in San Francisco, we were able to find out who had used a bike share along Market Street or near Market Street, and kind of send them a tailored message to get them to get involved, learn more, and send a message out. And we want to do a lot more of that. So, Charlotte would love to work with you and others to learn about what's coming up and how we can help, at the very least, just to get our riders engaged in understanding what's happening in their communities, as well as tapped into the work that you're doing and tapped into the work that others are doing, and speak up.
I'll just jump in, just say we have worked with bike coalitions, the Silicon Valley Bike Coalition and San Francisco Biketivist and others. We just find those are great natural partnerships. It is great to leverage our ridership on issues that are important to everyone. We did do I think for Biketivist, we did a thing where we sent a push notification, which means that everybody that opened up their app in San Jose over about 3 weeks saw a notice about the great bike ride that happened at the last Viva Calle, and then a button to click to go and to sign up for it. And that's something we'd like to do more of. But we've also done, a couple of years ago, we campaigned for Clean Power SF. We've also campaigned for the Great Walkway, the Great Highway project in San Francisco. So we do try to leverage our riders to get them to activate them, to get them to work on things that are important to us and important to our partners.
All right. Anyone else on that? Otherwise, we will move on.
Oh, I just wanted to give a quick plug for you guys that now that you guys are new Lime Hero partner, for people who currently ride scooters or bikes in San Jose and are members of Lime, they can opt in to be in our hero program. And what that means is that if someone's ride is $1.33, it will charge them $2, and the difference of that will go directly to the Silicon Valley Bike Coalition. So that's how our hero program works. So your scooter friends are actually giving you guys money now.
Thank you. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists to help inform us better about micromobility and the micromobility world. And Jennifer, thank you for moderating this panel. Hopefully this was incredibly enlightening for everybody. We have just a few minutes before we move into our breakout rooms. And let's see, can we go to the next slide? We have some stuff we just wanted to go over. So yes, thank you, guest panelists. And for those of you who heard about this forum and maybe you didn't even know what SVBC was and you just signed up, we need you to get involved, and it's super cheap. It's just $35, which is a floor, not a ceiling. Someone will probably drop a link in the chat there for you to officially join, but please get involved. We need everybody pushing so that we can have awesome bike-friendly communities. Next slide. All right, and so since we have your attention, also want to highlight some things that are coming up. And of course, first and foremost, we need to wish Diego Ortiz, who's a brand new member of the SVBC team, a happy birthday. It is his birthday today. So happy birthday, Diego. Just wanted to highlight some things that are coming up. We have our usual classes. We do basics and then a little more advanced classes on how to ride. May not be for the people on this call or this Zoom, but if you know people, please, that's what it takes. It takes personal outreach. One of you tapping a peer and saying, hey, you should sign up for this class and start riding more. So please spread the word to your non-riding friends or your friends who just need to increase their bike confidence a bit. We also have a ride coming up, Ride to Rancho San Antonio on the 6th of November. The link is there. I mentioned earlier that Viva Calle is coming up again. It's on the 7th of November, and Cisco on our team is frantically wrangling volunteers because we need to find folks to staff the intersection so that people can cross some of these streets safely. It's really fun and a great opportunity, especially for local teams, to sponsor an intersection. We would love it if some of our local teams would just take an intersection, adopt it, set up a booth, bring out volunteers, and help make sure that people have a wonderful experience at Viva Calle. So the link is there. Also another bike class there. We also have our Farm Box delivery program by bike. That's our partnership with Vegilution, where we deliver fresh produce by bike to families in East San Jose. And I think that's everything. Am I missing anything?
That's everything.
All right. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide, see if I missed anything. Okay, our next forum is November 17th, and it is on the very exciting topic of repaving and restriping streets, almost as exciting as parking. For those of you on these calls, you actually understand this stuff is quite interesting and exciting. So mark your calendars. And next slide. So now we are going to release you all to your city teams. These are the ones that we have set up. And I'm wondering if one of our staff folks can just chime in and instruct folks on how to make sure that they can select their team. Anyone want to chime in?